yourself feel comfortable. That's all that matters.
I wanted to do like a hat.
Ready? Feels like it's been forever. Okay.
Wait.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another Chat and All Movie Hour. We are back with a project that we have been wanting to do, my God, for probably 2 years it's been on the list. So we're finally doing it. It's here. Roman Polanski's Controversy.
How dare you say that name?
We're doing Rosemary's Baby. What? We'll edit that out. We're doing
we won't.
We're doing Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby. So this is obviously a favorite of both of ours, but I think Chad is probably the resident expert on the film and has also read Ira Levin's novel. So I am going to, without further ado, pass it over to Chad to get us started and dive into what is certain to be a controversial conversation. Let's do this.
I mean, depending on how far we go into the issues with the very problematic Roman Polanski, but the film itself is a masterpiece. This is obviously, like you said, based on the novel of the same name by Ira Levin. It was made the year after the novel came out, so the novel was like a fresh IP at the time. Like if you put yourself back in 1968 when they made the film, the book came out the year prior in 67,
which is insane.
And we are huge fans of a lot of horror movies that are like super low budget but super big earners, right? Like Exorcist, Alien, and this is in that league. It's a $3 million film that made like over almost 35 million.
Oh wow.
So like it's definitely in that league. It was produced by William Castle, who were both big, we did Straight Jacket. So William Castle directed Straight Jacket, and he was actually set to direct this movie. And they're like, calm down. Yeah, they're like, calm down. We're going to get like a real director, because it was known by then that he was like the B movie master.
Right.
And but this could have been just like Alien we talked about. Rosemary's Baby also could have been just a B movie. Yeah. But it was rescued from being a B movie by the likes of Mia Farrow, Roman Polanski, and but it was produced by this guy, William Castle. It was Roman Polanski's first Hollywood film, because he was, a foreign film director. This was like his first big Hollywood film. And it was also Mia Farrow's first Hollywood film as well. She was on a soap opera. And so it was a lot of, I love those moments that are like breakout moments for people.
Yeah.
We said for Sigourney Weaver, that was Alien. And right. So you can just keep drawing these parallels to these type of movies. But yeah, so I love this film. It follows the novel extremely closely. It's probably the most faithful adaptation like of all time. It's like really? Word for word, color for color, detail for detail of the book. And that's why Ira Levin is such a champion of this film. If you watch his interviews, he says that this is, his favorite film that has been adapted from any of his novels. He did Stepford Wives, that was adapted, and a few others, but he said like this is by far, Sliver with Sharon Stone actually was an adaptation of his work, I believe. Okay. But it was changed a lot. This by far was like his favorite thing. And he says that now when he thinks of his own work, Rosemary's Baby, the novel, he pictures Mia Farrow. Like she is Rosemary. And like
that's crazy.
Right. And this was an incredible breakout role for her. Incredible. She was married to Frank Sinatra at the time. He was notoriously like a huge asshole to her through the whole production. He had her in mind if you put yourself back in 1968, he was the big star. She was a nobody.
Right.
All right. And he really treated her that way because like he wanted her to have a much smaller role in a movie called The Detective that he was making at the time, which historically now is very insignificant compared to Rosemary's Baby, sure. Which is a lauded masterpiece, right? But so he was so upset. Right. So he was so upset that like her filming was like going long on Rosemary, that she wasn't going to be able to like start the filming, the production of the detective, which he had her in
Gotcha.
mind for. And like he kind of shit on the whole Rosemary's Baby like all the way along. Like she had him read the script, and he was like, I can't see you in this. He said, I can't see you in that role. And then she couldn't see herself in that role because her whole identity was like wrapped up in him as her husband at the time. And then famously, like he gets so mad that she's continuing to meet her commitment to this film Rosemary's Baby, and not like leave the film to go do his film when he's ready, that he serves her with divorce papers on the set. And like he has his lawyer go do it and like make a big scene, right? Not just like privately, but like very publicly on set. And then she has to film a scene immediately after being served with divorce papers because they're trying to stay on schedule. And she said she doesn't know how she got through it. But anyway, so
That's
it's
crazy.
really interesting.
I
And we've
want to
talked.
circle back to that at some point, because
Yeah.
that reminds me of something that I took a note about, which I'll table it, but I'm
Yeah.
learning all of this from you for the
Mia
first
Farrow's
time. So this is incredible.
no. Oh my God, the film has so many stories like that. It's an incredible film. It's so masterful. Every shot is like so well composed, to the point where Mia said that Roman, like if she's holding a pen up, it's like it can't be here or here or here or here, like within a millimeter. He had everything composed. And another star of the film, John Cassavetes, is also an iconic director himself. He's made like a bunch of incredible films from that era as well. But he's also an actor, so he plays, the husband role in this film, and his whole style was very the opposite of that, right? It was not like you hit your mark, you deliver your lines. It was all improv. Was the type of films he made, and so that was his style. So he kept pushing, and Roman was like, no, this is like my painting. Everything is going to be exactly where I want it. And like it was so faithful to the book, so everything like was there in the book for him to draw from. And then I guess tensions rose on set because of those two conflicting styles. And John Cassavetes, also being a film director, had his own vision in a way, and got sort of out of the actor's chair into like trying to like almost influence the directing. And Roman was having like none of that. So they were like competing a little bit. Like I think it was a hard shoot, but like what a masterpiece. I just think it's so masterfully done that there's like so many layers that you can watch it again and again and again. And I love theorizing, like, is it all in Rosemary's head, or is it really happening, and is there real witchcraft? Because it plays on both levels. You can watch the film like this is a woman who's having a legitimate mental breakdown, and all of it's in her head. Or you can watch it and take everything literally, and it works just as well both ways, which I love.
I'm so glad that you said that, because you just like lit a fire, because the whole, is it her own imagined, is the narrative imagined because of her hysteria? I want to circle back to that, because I have thoughts now that you bring that up. And
pregnancy.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot happening for her, like a new life, a new apartment, a controlling husband, pregnancy, being in unfamiliar surroundings. So yeah, there could be a lot feeding into having a mental breakdown or being in hysteria, like you said.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've read the novel, I have not, but in my research on Ira Levin, I mean, first and foremost, I knew that the Rosemary's Baby, the novel that he's writing, the narrative mirrored his personal experience, because his wife was pregnant. He was writing it while she was pregnant. They were in Manhattan. There was a lot of parallels. I didn't realize just how much the art imitated reality, but it's incredible that the book was such an instant success that an adaptation was produced a year later and was also an instant success. Robert Ebert, take it from the top now. Roger Ebert was quoted as saying that Polanski has outdone Hitchcock, which that's a pretty, that's, I mean, that's fucking high praise. Okay.
That's
So
major.
it's major. And so, you know, I was researching the adaptation and how the adaptation informed the production. And it's so interesting. And I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but the whole lore about how the production itself was cursed. And in my research, I discovered that the film's composer actually died from falling off of a building, much the same way that the witch does in the book, and the girl that's living with the elderly couple in the movie does. And then in addition to that, the producer, and I don't know if it's the same producer that you were mentioning, was at some point hospitalized for kidney stones and was having hallucinations of scenes from the movie and never made another Hollywood hit after that. So it seemed like there was a cloud over the production, and adding to that you have Polanski, who had just married Sharon Tate, what, in 67? So Sharon Tate
right
was
and she's in the film.
She is, and she
Yeah.
wasn't she in play to actually be Rosemary, but it didn't pan out that way. So she got that little cameo in the party. Right. But what I learned, which, you know, you're talking about the late 60s, you're talking about the Manson family, which I am entirely too obsessed with and familiar with. But you have Sharon Tate on set, right? Not only in the film, but she's on set. She's married to the director. People were saying that she kind of was herself very preoccupied with the occult. She was even quoted as saying, people think the devil is ugly, the devil is in fact beautiful. And that she was kind of this apparition, this kind of presence on the set, kind of haunting it in a way. And I found that interesting because obviously we know in 68, she and her unborn child, are brutalized and murdered by the Manson family. And this is all happening while the film is still in theaters. So there's a lot going on energetically, you know, with the production and release of this film. And Mia Farrow apparently, you know, obviously, you know, she was, you know, in famous circles. She was apparently at a retreat where the Beatles wrote a lot of the White Album, which played a part in the Manson family murders. And John Lennon, you know, a few years later is shot outside of the Dakota, which is where the movie is filmed. So there's just this kind of atmosphere.
I know there's a lot of weird stuff, but also we as humans are biologically programmed to look for patterns. So I think there are coincidences as well. Did you know that 30 years later, he wrote a sequel to this book called Son of Rosemary?
Oh, Son of Rosemary. Okay.
Son of Rosemary. So I haven't read that yet, but it's dedicated to Mia Farrow because he thought of her as Rosemary so strongly. So that's on my list to read next because I'm very curious where he takes it.
And that was written later in his life, and I think was the last thing that he wrote.
Yeah, that was written in 97.
Okay.
So like 30 years later, which is crazy.
From my understanding, you know, he was a little bit not cursed, but he had a shadow and a cloud over him after this film was made, because he was a Jewish atheist, and he apparently felt and admitted in interviews to guilt over having kind of created this fixation with the occult and contributing to satanic panic. And he never really matched the success of his novel or the adaptation. And of course, his marriage falls apart, and 4 years later he writes Stepford Wives. So clearly this mythology, this narrative, this story had weight, not just on him, but of everybody in the production, it feels like.
Right. I mean, there's just so much to talk about. I mean, because this film is so lush with like story, and just the actual film itself, we can dive into a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, what did you think of the performances? Ruth Gordon as the neighbor lady is so hysterical, and like she's so idiosyncratic. I just love the uniqueness of her as a performer. And she won an Oscar for her role in this film.
I didn't know that.
And
Well
and
deserved.
she also won the Golden Globe both for this film. And she's so she did a movie called Harold and Maude, which is like a really, have you ever
Oh
seen
my
that?
God, yes, that is her.
Right. Yeah, that's her. And so she's so funny in that movie. She's always kind of herself, but she's also so like, she's just so unique. She's such a personality.
Yeah.
And we don't get that anymore. I feel like we don't get those like personalities. So I love what she brings to it. But we both recently rewatched it. So what are your thoughts? Like, what were your impressions and your takeaways from the film itself?
I mean,
This
I've
time?
probably seen the movie a dozen times over the course of my life, but rewatching it, paying close attention for the purposes of our movie hour, and also coming at it from a mythological lens, with my academic studies, there was just so much there. And as far as, before we get into that, as far as the performances are concerned, yes, her performance is very idiosyncratic. And one of the things that I love about the movie is that the Satanists, especially the women, are extremely like just ridiculously funny. I mean, they're just caricatures of like just typical like elderly New York women, and but they just happen to worship, the Prince of Darkness. Okay, it is what it is.
Right.
Mia Farrow, obviously sublime. Every time I watch that performance, it's like, it's as revelatory as it ever was.
Yes, that's such a great word for it. And the Vidal Sassoon craze was going on, so she gets that haircut, and it's such. I love when like hair is tied to like characters. I don't ask me why, but I'm just always fascinated by hair and hair fads and hair trends and hair culture. And so I just love that like her hair is iconic in this even. But
and
like
it actually plays a part in moving the plot forward. Her
it really
hair
does.
cut is not just, a superficial thing. It actually serves a lot of plot points, and there's a lot of subtext to it. But
it helps her look more childlike, more frail. She's like falling apart. She's getting very pale. She's getting very thin. And her husband says like it's the dumbest thing she's ever done. So it kind of exposes his character in that moment. And it's really interesting what a change hair can make. Like, even not to keep bringing up Alien, but like I recently watched Alien and Aliens back to back with someone who had never seen them, which was incredible. But they commented on her hair because she has long hair in the first one, and then she cuts it to like in my friend's words, a Ronald McDonald haircut for the second one. I know, which is says there's too much truth in that.
It's not inaccurate. It is not inaccurate.
I know, right? But so I just love not that hair should be tied to like only women, but I just love like women's hair. Maybe it's because I'm a gay man. But so I like love that. And there's a historical element to her haircut too, because the history of like women starting to like say, hey, I can have short hair. And it's like, that's like almost a radical statement. Or I can have, or like that Vidal Sassoon just being so popular is like a historic element. It like ties it to the late 60s, right?
Yeah.
So it's just
like that waifish, white woman model, very, you have it with that pixie cut with Twiggy, you have it with Edie Sedgwick. Right. So that cut is so iconic for that moment in time.
Right.
And to your point, when she does cut it, once she becomes pregnant, Guy Woodhouse, her husband, in one of his many misogynistic moments says, that's literally like the worst decision you could have made. He's such a dick. I can't stand him.
I wonder what Frank Sinatra said about the haircut.
Probably much worse. Okay.
Probably much worse.
No, I mean, even from like just the opening credits are so misleading, because the opening title credits are this like very pretty pink font, and it's like you're getting this kind of
Yeah.
overview of the New York cityscape and the Dakota building, and there's like this la 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 kind of score.
Yeah, but
and then
the vocals are very haunting too, right? So it's
yeah,
almost like it's like the beginning of Blue Velvet with David Lynch, where everything is like the white picket fences, and like you just start to get this feeling that there's something under the grass, like worms, like there's an underbelly, like there's
I love
something
that.
definitely going to happen. And
Yeah,
I think Roman's definitely painting that picture. There's just something slightly off. And
yeah.
I really think it's nailed in the music, because you're right, the font is so like pretty and feminine, and like the cityscape is almost disarming, but then you have this like haunting melody.
And I love, we've talked about this in Alien, we've talked about this in a few other movies like Mother, obviously in Parasite, but where the set or the setting is very much its own character. And I feel that
Yes.
is very much the case in this film, because not only is the apartment building where everything takes place, for the most part, but you know, it's also where all of the horror takes place prior to their moving in. You know, the guy that believed he could raise people from the dead that got murdered in the lobby, to the infant that was found in 1959 in one of the apartments. So
Right.
the apartment building itself
Yeah.
is a character, and so too is
Oh yeah.
are the apartments of both the couple and, you know, the apartment of the Satanists.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. What a phenomenal dimension of this film. I love how much they explore that in this film. I mean, it's this the apartment building is a character more on par with how much location is a character in any other film you could think of. I mean,
Yeah,
it is so intrinsic to this film, and they even explore the like the layout of it, and like how the apartments connect, and they have several scenes discussing that. They show us the apartment before they move in, so you see
yeah,
how it used to look, and then they show us slowly how they're transforming it and
yeah,
painting it to what it becomes. But I love that scene early on where they're being shown the apartment, and the guy says, "Oh, why did she move the dresser in front of this closet door?" And we learn later the closet door is like has a false back where you can
right.
travel between the satanic neighbor's apartment and their
Apartment.
apartment. I love how that scene is done, because you can see the marks on the carpet that she had just frantically and at a
Yeah,
late stage moved that dresser to block that entrance off. So she was encountering all these issues with the satanic neighbors, and we're being kind of let in on it. You
right.
know, everything's like under the surface, like
Yeah,
not
yeah. The tension,
discussed, but there.
yeah, the surface tension is there from the moment they get the apartment
Oh,
tour from the
I love it.
realtor. To your point, you know, when he's explaining to them that the previous tenant was a woman who died, and you know, Rosemary points out that like the dresser had been dragged to block this closet, and
Yes.
eventually once she moves in and they're decorating, she moves the dresser and utilizes that closet. Um,
And
but
then the
that
young lady that's living with the neighbors also dies. And yeah, there's so much death around this building.
constant,
And
yeah,
then her friend, who's like her only lifeline, who's really trying to help her, Hutchins, is that his name in the film?
Hutch, yeah,
Hutch, he's
he
killed as
he's taken
well. It's
from her,
like,
yeah,
and the guy, her husband's character is competing for a prominent role. He's killed. So there's,
right.
even though we don't see a body count happening, there's like just so much death happening in this film, actually.
Yeah, I mean it's constant. It's literally constant, and even with like the what I find so interesting about the dresser and the closet is we learn in the third act of the film when Rosemary, you know, in her distress at being gaslit the entire movie,
Yeah.
and finally realizing that she is in fact living next to a Satanist, she
Right.
decides to pull the false back of the closet open, and of course, as you say, it leads into their apartment. But the idea of a wardrobe being, opening up a wardrobe, and then, I was getting Chronicles of Narnia, like,
Yes.
the wardrobe is the threshold, and then beyond that, the actual closet itself being the actual kind of gateway. And
Yes.
it's just there's so much symbolism. There's a lot of like birth canal symbolism. There's a lot of symbolism I want to get into.
Duality, like mirror
Please
symbolism, like the
don't get
apartment,
me
what it
started.
was, like almost multiverse, like the apartment, what it was, the apartment, what it is, like everything
Yeah.
all at once. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
And I love that, you know, we the first act is like, okay, there's this elderly couple that are like overly friendly and kind of pushy, but there's nothing suspicious about them, right? And we obviously learn that they're heading up the Church of Satan next door and trying to, bring a little baby Satan into the world. But for the most part, they're just, the elderly quintessential New York,
Right. Yeah.
elite,
They
annoying
never
neighbor.
seem to change, but where we notice the change as the audience is in Guy, her husband,
Right.
because that's our tell to the audience from the film is his change, because he goes from making fun of them to protecting them, and you notice that he starts to protect their interest. Like you just see him doing it without outing himself, but he's clearly starts doing that because they get to him and they turn him. Yeah. And they
the way
promise
that
him, yeah,
go ahead. No,
success.
go ahead.
No, they promise him success as an actor. They promise him all these things if for the first newborn, right? The firstborn that they have. So yeah, it's just interesting how he changes, and she doesn't really see it right away.
Yeah. And how easily he was bought by them.
Oh,
They're
well,
gonna,
he's amazing.
he literally sells his soul to the devil for an acting career. And hashtag misogyny, this poor woman has to get gaslit the entire movie, but gets raped by Satan.
Well,
it's fun for the whole family, really.
Yeah. But so where do you fall? I guess I do side with her, because whenever there's a strong female main character, you're seeing almost everything through her point of view in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're very intimate with Rosemary, even though obviously it's not a first person film. Like you experience it all hand in hand with her.
Right.
So to me, whenever I have that experience, I believe what I'm being told, because you share the point of view with that character.
Right.
So by default, you kind of have to buy in and believe them, because why would your own point of view lie to you? So that's why I always tend to fall on, no, I believe her,
And
but,
she is a reliable narrator. And also, to your point, like there is a lot of over the shoulder or behind. The camera is very much always behind her, kind of like Aronofsky did in Mother with Jennifer Lawrence. Like, you're always right behind, so you're seeing what she's seeing,
and it helps you. It always puts you in her shoes. It always makes you feel what she feels. So when people don't believe her, or they're not helping her, or someone that helps her dies, like you feel it so much stronger.
Yeah.
You want people to believe her.
What, in your experience, having read the novel too, like, do you have that same kind of questioning with the novel of whether or not she's a reliable narrator, or is this all in her head and she's just hysterical, or is it specific to the film? I
feel it's very much similar to the film. Like you could read it either way, but like you tend to want to side with her. And I was shocked at how faithful the novel was, because I had seen the film like you a dozen times, and then reading the novels, like, oh, this is like reading the script almost. It's so faithful, and it's a short novel. Like it's a quick read, and like it's a fun read because you pay more attention almost to the details of like those little things that clue you in along the way. So there's even more of those, I feel like, in the novel a little bit. The first cut of this film was 4 hours long. And
For
then they
sure.
edited that down to what we have, which is like an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever, or less than 2 hours.
We
They
need the
went from
direct
4 hours to like a 2 hour cut and then to what we have. So like
we need the Snyder cut.
right there, yeah. So there is stuff that was like left out that's in the book, but it's nothing revelatory. It's all like just detail. But I feel like some of the stuff that was the most exciting from reading the book, that excited me the most, was little clues that like stuff was going on in the
Right.
periphery and in the background around her that was demonic, or like just clued you in that stuff is happening around her all the time that she doesn't see, but it's really going on.
Right.
So just like little things like that. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. But
The ominous presence that has not revealed itself.
yeah, and like, oh, this person, like, she saw someone slip out the door, and like, oh, that's that person. Like I can't give a clear example, but like just little things that where you can go back and start putting the puzzle together, just like in the film. But I think it works even more so in the book, of like, oh, these people had, from the minute she moved in, they were working on her being the mother of this. And so you really see that in the book.
But yeah, she never had a chance. I mean, my God, to be married.
No, like even the doctors, like they're all in on it. That's why they keep pushing for that one doctor. And then they're able to turn the later doctor who she fights for, you know, Chad, like, hey, she's crazy. Whole
thesis on the gaslight for the doctors. It's and yes.
And they're men, of course. They're all men.
Yeah, they're complicit, and it really mirrors what women experience day in and day out, especially women of color. But you know, you go to the doctor and you're not believed. Your pain is not taken seriously. And, you know, it's one thing to be gaslit by, you know, your husband who just sold not only his soul, but you to the Prince of Darkness for, you know, a role in a film. But your caretakers, your protectors, your doctors are no different. And that is another element of interesting. It's another element,
and it's so interesting that he does that in the film, and that there's like similar stuff going on with like Manson and Sharon Tate, and like how it mirrors that is just like so crazy.
It's like we talked about in Alien, and in our memory, the documentary about Alien discussion, movie hours rather, this movie, it was a perfect storm of zeitgeist, right? Like right place, right time, right elements, right players.
Right. Women's liberation was big. I feel like that's woven throughout the film. Paranoia, Catholicism, Christianity, and the occult. Yes. Like these are all big themes that are ever present throughout the film. And they're all themes that for one reason or another, I personally have always been drawn to, whether it's in Madonna's Blonde Ambition tour or like any of the things that we've explored. Those are things that always come back to. It's like Catholicism, religious symbology, women's empowerment. Like those are always things that are like really draw me for some reason. And they're all in this film.
They're deeply archetypal motifs too. So they reside in the collective unconscious, or subconscious rather. And so when they materialize in pop culture or in high art, it's so interesting because that's happening all of the time. But when it coalesces like it does in Alien or in Rosemary's Baby, where everything, like every piece of the puzzle just fits together so perfectly to create this mythology and this lore, so in this case so intense that it literally it haunted people in real life, is quite an extraordinary phenomenon. And I mean, Ira Levin must have been tapped into something deep and dark, because in one of the interviews I read with him, even though he was a Jewish atheist, he was deeply interested in these motifs, right? Like there's a lot of Catholic symbology in this movie, which I wanted to touch on. But for Rosemary, who, you know, is for all intents and purposes, like this really kind of delicate, naive stereotype of a woman, housewife,
American,
she's fully domesticated, you know, she
Milk fed.
and she's a woman of faith, seemingly, to have to be confronted with the exact opposite, is a really interesting and fantastic storytelling choice.
And Mia Farrow had the exact same experience because she was also raised very religious. It mirrored her life,
Yeah,
like identically. Yeah,
it's crazy. Yeah,
and she struggled with doing the film for the
for
satanic
that reason.
elements. Yeah,
Yeah,
just like the
that's
character.
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that
Yeah.
actually, like, that's a good segue into like kind of the second act where, she's having these visions and hallucinations, and she can kind of hear what's going on next door, but she doesn't trust herself. She doesn't quite know what's going on. The rape pregnancy scene, where her husband has, obviously agreed to have her be impregnated by Satan to spawn the Antichrist. And so she goes to sleep and is basically raped. And during the rape, she's having essentially like a fever dream, uh, where there's like this weird Kennedy symbology where she sees both the Kennedy. It's really fucking weird, but it's also very much like that's in the cultural ethos at that time.
Yeah, the zeitgeist, for sure.
And she's seeing the Pope in the fever dream, like looking over her as she's tied down, and she's apologizing to him because she's tied up and can't talk to him, and her wedding gets taken off on the boat by Jack Kennedy, but it's really not it's really not Kennedy, it's her neighbor. And it's and then you see Satan actually consummate this relationship, and it's so disturbing. And then for her to wake up the next day next to her husband, as if nothing out of the ordinary happened, and she still thinks it's a dream, but she has scratches on her body, and he laughs it off and disregards her and says, "Oh, I got a little overzealous."
Right.
And she was like, "Well, if I wasn't feeling well and I was out of it, why did you have sex with me?"
I know.
Said,
it's really interesting how many times she stands up for herself, and how much it's clear that from the director's point of view that he wants us to be on her side, against her husband, who whenever he's a misogynist, especially coming from someone like Roman Polanski, which we'll get into.
The irony.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's such a feminist movie in a lot of ways from this Roman Polanski. I mean, he's working from the source of R11, but it so puts you in her shoes. Every little slight that she feels is felt by the audience, and it's an injustice.
Yes, and the writing in this, Roman Polanski having written it in addition to directing it, when she confronts her husband and says, "Why did you have sex with me if I wasn't feeling well and I was out of it?" And he said, "I didn't want to miss baby night," and then just kind of like laughs it off. And it's just so.
Which is another.
No, go ahead.
He makes a lot of excuses. That's just another in a long line of like, he tries to excuse everything weird away just so that he can protect the satanic neighbors and their interests. So he's constantly protecting their interests and making excuses.
Yeah, and literally.
And you realize them later.
Yeah.
When after you let in on the whole plot, then you can go back and dissect all of his behavior,
It's even more horrifying. You and I talk a lot in our movie hours about, taking off our now it's our 2022 glasses. We've been doing this since 2020. But taking off our like 2020 woke, virtue signaling, all of PC glasses, and, contextualizing the time and place in which, this art was produced. Having said that, though,
that's what's so crazy about this film. Because I feel like you don't have to do that with this film. Of all films, a Roman Polanski film from 1968 is like so pro-feminist and like really like making the case for her against all of that type of behavior. It's crazy. Yeah.
And what's like the extra layer of horror of it, on top of like the obvious superficial, this is a horror movie, Satan, 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 is that women are gaslit by their husbands like this right now. It's happening as we're filming this movie. Our husbands are having non-consensual sex with their wives. We
While
know
they
in
sleep or pass out. Yeah.
right, like 2022, not a whole lot has changed.
Yeah.
And so it just adds another layer of
Yeah.
it grounds the horror is what I'm trying to say. I wanted to ask you about the final act. Once she becomes pregnant and she cuts her hair, she gets very waifish and sickly. And there's this moment where she's walking alone through the city and she's obviously in a lot of pain. And she literally looks up and she says, "Pain be gone, I will have
Like a
no
prayer.
more of thee." And and then she passes by a window
Right.
display of the Virgin Mother. It's like a nativity, more Catholic symbology. And it's just, it is deeply feminist because the pain of being a woman, the pain of pregnancy, just all of that is there in the subtext, and I love it.
Yeah. And she's being followed. We don't know it yet, but she's being followed, which is again just like the paranoia and the constant, like they just got to have complete vigilance over this woman. She's not allowed to even go out by herself, even one time.
Right.
And then when she tries to have a party that's not like sanctioned by the neighbors or where they're not invited, they keep trying to like get into the party or like, and she's just not allowed any vacancy over herself or her body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even when, to your earlier point about how when she tries to go to the doctor, it's obviously the doctor that the Satanists have sanctioned. And when she finally gets an opportunity to see her own doctor, he too betrays her. And, it's just.
Because of course she's insane, right?
Right.
I love that line. I love that line where she said, "There are plots against people sometimes, aren't there?" And it gets him to say, well, yes, of course, in history, there have been plots against people. So she said, so why is it so crazy that there may be one against me right now? But ultimately, no, the doctor then would not believe a woman. I mean, it sounds wild.
It's so it's horrifying. And even in the waiting room of the doctor's office, the Time magazine she picks up says God is dead, which I love.
Yeah, I know, love that.
And when she goes into labor, she's sedated. There's a whole other conversation to be had about women throughout history being sedated against their will during pregnancy. There's all of this subtext, which we kind of talked about that with Alien too, like how cognizant was Ridley Scott, how cognizant was Polanski of how much he was really saying versus it just kind of up from the ethos of the moment. But yeah, the question I wanted to ask you is, when we get the grand reveal at the end, she passes through the closet, she discovers that her baby is not in fact dead, that they are hiding it in their apartment. And it is revealed to her that obviously her child is the Antichrist. And the camera is just fixed on, as she looks over the bassinet, the camera is fixed on her. You never get a reveal of the baby. In the book, is there a reveal of the baby or no?
I believe there's a description, but and so there was talk during production of showing the baby or not, and Roman said from the beginning he was never going to show the baby.
Good.
In the book you get kind of like a description of it. The fact that we don't see it robs us of evidence that it's real or not. So it could still just be in her head. But she says, oh my God, it's eyes. Like, why are so that we paint our own picture.
And that's one of the most iconic lines of the movie, because she says, oh my God, his eyes. And then the neighbor, the Satanist, says, the castanets, the husband, he says he has his father's eyes. I mean, the writing is just so good, but her expression, speaking of performance, the expression and the shriek that she lets out when she sees the child is just, it's one of those rare moments in performance history where it's iconic, dare I say. Like
Yes.
it's
Yeah,
unmatched.
it is. And I love that he doesn't show it, because we've talked a lot about the wisdom of directors knowing what to show and what not to show. The best directors left a lot to the imagination. We talked about Hitchcock with Psycho,
Yeah.
you know, this one upping that in Roger Ebert's mind. Even in Alien, like leaving a lot to the imagination, keeping things in shadows. Ridley Scott only showing like pieces of the alien at a time, never like, so you didn't get that man in a suit vibe. The wisdom of what to show, what not to show. Jaws is another great example. Steven
Perfect example.
Spielberg, like
Yeah.
revealing the shark very slowly, and like it lets you imagine so much more. And like a lot of it was down to what could they do with special effects to make a baby at that time in the 60s and have it be like very believable, but
Yeah.
also not showing it lets you imagine it, and it
It's
makes
more
makes
scary.
right, it makes, because scary is different for everyone.
Right.
So when you imagine it as what is scary to you, which is different than what's scary to me is different to what's scary to you, and we're all going to imagine. Yeah, so it's genius, really.
And I mean, what would be more terrifying, seeing a demon baby or seeing a human baby and knowing that it's the Antichrist, like Damien
Right.
and the Omen, you know? Leaving it up to the imagination is always, I
Yeah.
think, is the best move in these
The
types of.
Omen is the Omen is a good like cousin to this film, and I think about the Omen a lot when I think about this film. They're
Yeah.
good, and The Exorcist, like they're all in that same family. It's
We're
very
getting a
interesting.
sequel to The Exorcist. I'm scared but excited.
I'm always scared when they're new, but
All
we'll
right.
see.
Well, did you want to pivot to the
Yeah, let's talk
director
about
or okay.
Mr. Polanski.
All right.
So we have talked a lot recently in our movie hours about art versus artists, and we have loved to bring this into the fold as part of the conversation. I think you and I both consciously want to make this part of the conversation, especially in today's age where people are seem so much more open and ready to have these conversations for the better. So I watched a documentary in preparation for this called Wanted and Desired, which I thought was like the strangest title for this documentary, because I didn't understand it until I watched the documentary. Because I'm like, well, how is he desired? Like I
Right.
get wanted because he's
He was
still
in
at
demand.
large, I guess.
Yeah, he's still in demand.
Yeah, and they've dropped a lot of charges and said that like maybe he wouldn't be arrested if he came back to the U.S. But at this point, he has evaded the law of the U.S. and escaped the country, and is living in Europe to avoid persecution for the rape of a 13-year-old girl in the 60s. So a girl who has not publicly forgiven, but the additional allegations that have surfaced, as well as her of other young women who said that they were also, violated by him. So
Yeah.
definitely, obviously not good. And
Right.
so this film, Wanted and Desired, the desired part shows how the US reacted to this when it first happened versus
Right.
how Europe reacted, and how
Okay.
they perceived him, how the press messaged it through the press channels, and
Right.
how the two different countries had complete different viewpoints on this. So Europe notoriously embraces him still to this day, celebrates him, does not, sort of sides more with him, because his take on the 13-year-old story is that he doesn't deny it, that the 13-year-old that he sexually assaulted, he doesn't deny it. He says that in reality she was like more like a mature woman, and that she sort of like, this is really weird territory. So she
Safe
was
space.
like really for it. She was initiating it. She was experienced already at that point in her life with other men, and that that was sort of his take on it. I'm
Right.
paraphrasing.
Yeah.
Her take, if we believe her story, is that no, that's not true. She did say no, and no means no, and that should be it. Again, she has since come out and like forgiven him, and she actually says that psychologically she's more damaged by what what unfolded after the assault,
Yeah.
with this like ongoing assault against her from the judge, from the media, from everybody, like just this never ending barrage against her, right?
Yeah.
From this asshole judge that oversaw this case. The judge was like taken off the case eventually because there was just so much corruption that came out through the lawyer. And so this documentary is great because it really takes you through that whole thing with interviews of the lawyers on both sides and the female who was assaulted herself. It's a really interesting documentary by HBO that I recommend. Obviously, you and I are not fans of this director as a person, if he's going to be that kind of guy. Again, he has a really interesting background of like his parents dying around World War II, around the persecution of the Jews by the Nazi regime, and like this whole thing, like he sort of escaped that and came out of that, and is very much a mindset of a different culture and of a different. He speaks Polish at home. I mean, he came to America to be a success as a filmmaker, but he's very much not an American in a lot of ways. Like I said, like Europe has totally embraced him. I guess don't have an issue with what he was doing, but in our day and age, it's not cool to have sex with minors. So
it's interesting because you say, Europe doesn't take issue with him in the same way that America does, which is true, but at the same time, America does still revere him and is still giving him awards. They're still nominating.
Yeah, he got the Oscar in 2009 for The Pianist, and
which is a phenomenal film, and that's the last film of his that I consumed. I no longer consume any of his projects, but America is still, much like they are with other predators. We could list, we could list them off forever. He's still
the tide has turned a lot though.
The what?
Yeah, like the tide is turning with Weinstein, obviously.
Yeah.
And they did strip him. They removed him from the Academy. So the Academy disowned him. They took his membership out. But to my knowledge, they didn't take away his Oscar.
Right.
He still has that. So he kind of escaped, I think, because of the maybe statute of limitations surrounding what he did, which is horrible because there really shouldn't be any. But because we're so far removed from it, I think it's almost treated different than the Weinstein stuff, which is so much more modern.
Yeah. Well, that's also, on the fault of the public and the audience too. It's very easy, out of sight, out of mind. But, at the end of the day, I don't care how many men a 13-year-old has been with. That's not license for you to have sex with her, especially after you've given her a quaalude and she's repeatedly said no. And then, nothing to say of the other women that have come forward since.
Well, we're very much in the day and age of just believe the woman, but at that moment in time, we weren't back then. And it was very much like it is still like he said, she said. I believe her because I tend to believe the woman in these situations if I have to make a choice. But it is very much, he had a different story. He doesn't deny being with her, but he did have a different story. His story still doesn't really make a difference much, but it's just interesting. It's still a he said, she said. There wasn't anyone else there. Yeah.
And it begs the question, that we've talked about and with the Mia Farrow documentary that goes into the assault of her daughter by Woody Allen, which is an extraordinary 4 or 5 part series on HBO that everyone should watch, that really delves into this topic. The conversation around art versus artist is obviously very nuanced, and you have artists like Wagner, who are, you know, have long since been dead, who created high art. His music, you know, is transcendent, but he was, you know, obviously an anti-Semite, and that's me just being polite. But that person is dead. You know, Picasso, also a pedophile, dead. Louis C.K. very much alive. Roman Polanski very much alive. J.K. Rowling,
Yeah,
she hasn't assaulted anybody, but her transphobia has stained the
right.
her work, for a lot of people, for others not so much. But
yeah,
is the conversation different when the person is, excuse me, dead versus alive? Because when they're alive, obviously you can make the choice not to put money in their pockets. But is that really the yardstick by which we should be making the decision? I don't know. What do you think?
It's so crazy to me because Mia Farrow very much defends Roman Polanski, but she's so against, you know, fights the battles of her own child's rape, who was a minor.
Which is so interesting because there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on there.
Right? Like, what is happening? So it's really hard to understand. Yeah.
And it's interesting because, you know, you have something, I'll just use Harry Potter again as an example, where there are a lot of people, you know, straight, gay, whatever, but there's a lot of voices on the queer spectrum and the trans spectrum that are very adamant about you cannot consume Harry Potter content and not be transphobic. And
no,
I personally disagree with that.
I do too.
But I'm also, you know, coming from a position
I think you shouldn't. I think you shouldn't consume Harry Potter content because it's not good.
Okay.
But no, you and I have this art versus artist conversation all the time, and I sort of developed an opinion that we have to separate. I mean, partially through our conversations, I've come to that sentiment that we have got to separate art versus artists. We talked a lot about Michael Jackson and a lot about the separate, that is a big one for me because you and I grew up with Captain EO and listening to Michael Jackson, and that's never going to go away. Those happy memories are always going to be happy for us. They're maybe tainted, but it's like kind of separating, I think, is very healthy in a lot of ways.
And it gets into tricky territory because Hitler was an artist, right? But we're obviously not consuming his fucking shitty portraits because
luckily he wasn't a good one.
Touche. But I mean, obviously, J.K. Rowling is not Hitler. So is it a scale? A scale is a very crass term, but right. Is it? And also,
and it could also be like who is impactful to you personally. Like maybe there's an artist that isn't renowned, but they just had a really striking impact on your life personally. So I think for me, that's what it always comes down to, is like how, like Michael Jackson being such a part of my childhood and my life, it makes it more significant. It makes it harder for me to accept his wrongdoings or to hear him now. Right. It's more difficult. Yeah.
And it's like, especially
I'm sure it is for many Harry Potter fans. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's especially difficult, I'm not going to speak for you, but our proximity to whiteness is, it's not even proximity, it's we're in it, right? So like your proximity to whiteness obviously, makes it all the more easier for you to separate the artist from the art, because we haven't personally been victimized.
We have like the privilege to do that.
Yeah. So taking that into account, but also, there are schools of art criticism that suggest that one of them being there's interpretation, there's summary, there's analyze, and there's judgment. And only when you get into kind of analyze, but more specifically, only when you get into the judgment school of art critique are you really supposed to conflate the two, the art and the artist? The other three, you're supposed to separate. Now, this obviously, you know, can be critiqued in and of its own, but if we wholesale erase every piece of art that was created by a shitty person, up to and including people that are pure evil like Hitler. So I'm talking about, you know, you have Louis C.K., let's say, over here, J.K. Rowling over here, and then you have Hitler over here, right?
Right.
If we Hitler's a bad example. I'll use Wagner instead.
No,
Wagner,
it's a great example.
Anti-Semite, created some of the most beautiful music, deeply mythological, just a genius artist.
Good art.
A fucking Nazi, right? So you have him on one end of the spectrum and you have J.K. Rowling on the other. And you have the whole one is alive and one is dead, so you can finance one and not the other. But what I'm trying to say is that if we wholesale say anybody that has harmed a person or group, from J.K. Rowling's end of the spectrum all the way up
to that now probably includes you and I.
Right, that
like who hasn't
literally
on some level?
All art goes out the window because
and I mean, two things real quick. Like, I think it's a personal choice. So I think everyone is gonna find their way to deal with it. It really is like there is no like you said, wholesale approach. It's like it's very individual. It's very personal. It's different if they're alive versus not, because you can make the case personally, I don't want to like vote for that with my dollars. Like, I don't want to give support to that because it's still alive. I think that's a very valid case to make. But I think once they're dead and gone, it's like the art, you can't really erase that from history. We can say that if we now believe Michael Jackson's accusers, we can't erase the fact that he transformed pop music and popular culture, because that already happened and we can't pretend that it didn't happen.
Right.
So there has to be some kind of disassociation between the two. Yeah. In my mind, I think.
I agree. But I just want to say three quick things in response to the things that you just brought up, because we did mention, you know, our privilege and our proximity to whiteness, and our proximity or our distance rather from marginalization, by however many degrees, gives us the luxury to make that decision much easier, right? So is it also then in part of our work as white people, in our, you know, decolonial work and our advocacy and allyship work to stop consuming content, even if it doesn't hurt me, knowing that it hurts X, Y, and Z? I'm raising the question. I'm just raising it.
But like, how does my relationship with Michael Jackson, being a privileged white person, any different than any minority's relationship to Michael Jackson? They, just like me, do not know him. And I don't think it changes at all. So you tell me what I'm missing.
No, I don't think you're missing anything. I think it's a question that I don't have an answer to. I think it's a question that we should
just exploring
it. We should ask ourselves, though, because it's a good checks and balance.
Yeah, but no, I would ask someone of color or someone of minority, other than a gay man who's white and a white cis woman. You know
like
what I mean?
Like, as an example, somebody who's specifically been victimized. Like a good example is the journalist that did the Woody Allen Mia Farrow documentary, who herself was a longtime Woody Allen fan until she uncovered all this stuff. And she herself said, knowing what I know, I can't pretend, to your point, I can't pretend Annie Hall isn't a masterpiece, but I can choose not to consume any more of his content because he is harming so-and-so.
I think even saying that, like, okay, when I hear Michael Jackson now, I'm uncomfortable because I can't stop thinking about what he's done, or Woody Allen or whoever. I think that's even legitimate reason. Just don't listen to it. But it still goes back to like an individual choice or a personal choice. So someone who is molested as a child is going to have a different relationship if they were close to Michael Jackson's music growing up than me, even, because
Sure.
we have different experiences to the trauma.
Right.
But that, again, that's why it's so individual. Like, and that has nothing to do with privilege. That's just more about, because a person of privilege could have been traumatized in that way.
There was actually Will Wheaton, who was on Star Trek and was in Stand By Me. He was a child actor. He was assaulted when he was a child by somebody in Hollywood, and he was posed with this same question, you know, can you separate the art from the artist? And he believes that it should be an individual decision, and that he was wary of even, you know, art that has been created by people that have harmed children, pedophiles, molesters, etc. Throwing the baby out with the bathwater is dangerous. And Nick Cave, who I'm not super familiar with his music and his work, but he was posed also with that question, and I liked what he had to say, because he articulated it in a way that I've been trying to articulate this for so long and have failed to do so. Is that I think the entire like dialectic, like the premise of can you separate art from artist, is already like a false dialect. It's already the wrong question to be asking, or it's not articulated in a way that is of service. And Nick Cave was saying that most shitty people create really good art. And if when you hear a lot of artists, especially real like geniuses, they will always talk about how it's not them, like they're channeling something from God or higher. So if you subscribe to the possibility that we are, whether you're religious or not, that we are vessels channeling something sacred down into the profane realm, then you're being a piece of shit, evil, whatever, worst case scenario. How does that jive with the fact that you're creating transcendent art? I thought that was just a really great way to reframe it.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great example. Very interesting. I still just think like it's so individual. It's like one of those topics like religion or spirituality. Spirituality is a better word, actually, where it's just so, the term or the idea, the concept itself is just vague enough that everyone has their own relationship and interpretation to it.
Yeah. There was a quote I found, and I'll link it in the description because I don't remember who said it, but in response to this kind of false dialectic we've created with this discourse, they said criticism, and they're speaking of art criticism is to the actual experience of art what reading about love is to love itself. Okay. You know, do I agree with that through and through my bones? I don't know, but I think there is a lot of truth to that. It speaks to this idea that I am still trying to tease out and articulate of we're starting with the wrong question, or we're phrasing the argument from an incorrect place to begin with. So it's impossible to
like get to the crux of it. No, that rings so true. Like that just rings true to me. So that's definitely something we could explore more. And it's worth going down the alleyway of the all of the like Confederate statues that are coming down, because the statue in itself is art and it's also historical. So it's both. I mean, you could argue whether or not it's art, but you can't argue. It's definitely a piece of
sculpture. It's a physical. I know.
Right. It's a sculpture, and it's a part of history. What I love about them coming down is that almost not unlike Walt Disney with Epcot, how he wanted it to be like a living, like when you say like a living document, a living a work that's like constantly evolving with technology, like Epcot was supposed to be. It's kind of like society and culture and our idols, right? Our statues should be that way. They should evolve too. I think statue, who said a statue was ever just meant to be like a permanent thing? Because
Right.
culture, a statue is a reflection of what is revered in culture at that time. So as we take it down, I think we should put something new up. Like, let's put Beyonce up or something.
Amen. A fucking man.
Or God forbid, God forbid Kim Kardashian. But like, our idols
Whole
and
nother
our statues
conversation.
should change. So like, how does what I'm saying with that relate back to our conversation of art?
I'm gonna tell you right the fuck now, because you just named something, and what you've named is the importance of incorporating the nuance of time and history into this conversation. Because going back to, it's easier to consume the art of evil, shitty people who are dead because you're not financing it anymore. But even to me, that's not even a strong argument, but let's go with that. The reason why that doesn't work for me is, okay, yeah, so I'm not going to consume, I'll use Michael Jackson as an example. I'm not going to consume his
Rosemary's Baby.
Or excuse me, I misspoke. I can consume Michael Jackson's art still because I'm not putting money in his pocket, theoretically, right? Whereas if I buy Harry Potter books or go to Universal, I'm putting money in JK's pocket because she's still alive.
Right.
But here's the thing, she too will die. So 100 years from now, Harry Potter will be in the same position as Michael Jackson's catalog and Wagner or whomever you want to name, Picasso, all these shitty, fucking dirty, most of them men who are just shitty people that happen to create extraordinarily transcendent art, which is critical for the human race to thrive. They're all going to die too. So 100 years from now, Chad and Mel's great grandchildren are going to be filming a movie hour saying, well, it's okay that we consume Harry Potter because J.K. Rowling's dead. So that whole argument doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
So when you interject this concept of time, it's very important because history changes.
But do you think we're enhancing her quality? I mean, at a certain point, I mean, she's already an extremely wealthy person. So I guess the argument is like we're lining her pockets additionally by supporting it, and that she doesn't deserve it. Her quality of life is going to improve. But realistically, if you take it case by case, most of these people are so wealthy, they won't notice a quality of life increase. Because once you're and this is like an anti-billionaire statement, which I'm happy to make, because I'm always making that statement. Bernie Sanders should have won. But anyway, now I'm on a tangent. But like, you know what I mean? Like, she's already a such and such millionaire, billionaire, whatever.
It's not going to hurt her to not buy
her quality of life's not going to improve because you spent $15 on a DVD of Harry Potter or a book.
It's at the point now where it's like, and this, okay, so here's a good segue.
Like, you have no power over her, right? You have no, it's a perceived power over her that doesn't exist.
You're naming it. You are naming it because at the end of the day, boycotting Amazon, for example, does fuck all, right? Bezos has already won. Me not getting my whatever from Amazon is gonna make it, we're past that point, right? So
shout out to Bo Burnham.
Please don't even get me started on that masterpiece. But I was on a Reddit rabbit hole earlier on this whole artist I was seeing what the 4chan incels were having to say about this. And somebody raised actually a really interesting point, though, credit where credit is due. There was a thread on Artvert, can you separate the two? And somebody said, why don't we ask the same question of the people that invented the telephone, the equipment and technology? Like, why is it just art and not
that is so mind-blowing
everything else, right? So if you were to extrapolate this conversation, like, are you not going to use, and let's assume that the person that invented, I don't know, drywall, we all use drywall.
Alexander Graham Bell, we'll just say.
Okay, so what if Alexander Graham Bell was a pedophile? Do we stop using
that
phones?
Is so brilliant. Like, why why does it begin and end with art, the conversation? It's so insane
Leave it to
because
fucking Reddit.
it's not
Leave it to fucking Reddit, because it
right.
had never
We're
occurred to me to
equal,
ask that question.
right? We're equal opportunists in every other area except that area. It seems
Right.
like I don't understand.
And it's the thing, we can make choices to vote with our dollars, like boycotting Bezos or whatever. But at the end of the day, we're past, and this is blame it on capitalism, we're beyond the point of that making a difference, because we're also reliant on these things, such that, if I truly believe in my heart and soul that Bezos is pure evil incarnate, my not engaging with his empire does fuck all to him and actually hurts me, because I rely on that service to survive. So and if we apply that same argument to art, we all rely on art to survive.
And you could extrapolate what you said and take it further. I think this is what the point you're making. We're hurting ourselves by denying ourselves of that art far more than we're ever going to affect that artist. So we're just robbing ourselves of happiness around separating ourselves from that art. I mean, we're struggling more than we're ever going to make them struggle.
Right. And I think it's, art is, it's interesting to reframe it that way. And art is necessary for survival. It has been since the dawn of time. So to put it in this other kind of category, I think it lacks nuance, and it's a little bit dangerous, because we all rely on art to survive. It's not just this luxury or this thing that's pretty to look at. It's we would not have language. We would not be at where we are in the stage of our evolution if it weren't for art. So that's why I think it's dangerous to wholesale throw things out. But we did when we did our Snow White movie hour, and we started getting into Song of the South, and I was expressing that, I grew up on that movie, and so little Melissa still only sees it as like a good thing.
Right.
Since we've filmed that, I've done a complete 180 insofar as I'm no longer little Melissa. I can think critically, and although I have good memories of watching that movie from the lens of a 8-year-old or whatever, I'm 40 now, and so I am not going to engage with Splash Mountain as an example, because that's a very simple decision I can make that hurts me not at all, but that is an act of solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters who have been saying that this ride and this mythology and this movie is toxic since Jump Street, hence why it's in the vault and why the ride is being rethemed.
Right.
So, and that's a very silly example, but it's like,
no, it is a solid example. And I think that it's worth saying that when you were 6, you didn't have the knowledge, the wherewithal, the insight. So you should never fault yourself for having loved that either. And I think that you can be two people at once. You can be the 6-year-old Melissa that loved it and be okay with the fact that you used to love it, and also be mature adult Melissa now and not love it and not partake in it, but be okay with the fact that it changes and hopefully improves over time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
But
so there are instances where the decisions are super easy, and then there are decisions, like for me with Michael Jackson, and for you with Michael, in a lot of ways we love Michael, and so it's really, really hard. But again, I'm not a victim of molestation, so it's easier for me in that case to be more objective about how I arrive at that decision. Whereas,
and you and I are two individuals that rewatch a lot of older content a lot. Mm-hmm. We're not afraid to watch older content the way that some people maybe just don't do that. Right. So for you, and so I don't know if you've had this experience, but I have the experience all the time where I watch something older and I'm like, oh, that's really offensive now,
Yeah,
because times change and culture changes, and
right.
hopefully you change with it, like you and I have. But like when I watched Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and they say the word fag, like it's just like nothing.
Yeah,
It's like so shocking to hear. But when I was a teenager or whatever,
right. It
I
was
wasn't
normal.
offended. It was just sort of like so normalized that you don't even
Yeah.
see it.
And it's changing so quickly now that like
Yeah.
language has changed. Like you can't say that. You could say it yesterday, you can't say it. So it's people
Yes.
are having to adapt quicker than ever, which is also
Mm.
you know, a different part of the conversation. But you
Yeah,
know,
and some people are bitter about that. Some people
right.
are okay with that. I feel that you and I are pretty flexible, but I think like the whole Midwest is like struggled with all
But
of this, and I think that's why Trump was so popular, and make America great again, like take it back again,
like it ever was great in the first
right.
place. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's everything is connected. No, but it, you know, with the case of Rosemary, which is obviously the topic of this movie hour, you know, we both obviously consumed Polanski content, you know, for the purpose.
Yeah.
Now, will I consume or have I consumed anything since The Pianist? No. Um, much like I can watch Annie Hall, but
But
I will
like, would it
never.
be bad if you did though, just because it's from him? Do you know what
It
I mean?
wouldn't. It would literally harm no one because no one would know, but but
and
in
and
but
because B, you don't pay for your content.
B, because I pirate everything for legal purposes. That was a joke. That was a joke for legal purposes.
Yeah, of course.
But no one would know, right? But at the same time, you know,
Does
just
it make you personally
use
uncomfortable?
right, use veganism as an example. Nobody's going to know if you sneak a chicken fucking nugget, but will you be able to live with yourself if
Yeah.
you make a decision that's not in alignment with your principles? And, you know, if
Your
trans and
morals.
queer brothers and sisters are saying, hey, you know, you cannot separate Harry Potter from the author's transphobia, et cetera, and so forth, I can make the case as somebody who is queer that
Yeah.
but I'm not Jewish. I can make the case that the 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 good, the true, and the beautiful in those books outweighs her shit
Right.
and the
I
anti-Semitism.
mean,
But I'm not Jewish,
I think
so
right.
you know,
I think
I'm not going to
theoretically,
be wounded when I watch it. I'm going to be aware that
right.
it's fucking horrible. Just like when you walk into Gringotts Bank at Universal and the goblins are there, and it's just like,
And they're all Jews.
it's like, it's so ridiculously in your face. But
Yes.
it's like,
I mean, it's like, how far do you want to take things? Because I'm all for standing in solidarity and I'm all for fighting fights on behalf of marginalized people. But you can't let everybody's trauma with every single topic affect every decision that you make at every moment of every day.
I
Because
100% agree with you.
right, there has to be some point in which you just allow yourself to be happy.
I agree with you.
You can't experience everyone's trauma all the time. That's not to say we shouldn't fight on behalf of everyone as much as we can, because I'm all about that. But I mean,
But you're also
there
naming
has to be a
another
limit to everything.
layer. You're also naming another layer of nuance because, like Will Wheaton, or there are plenty of Jewish people that still consume, that love Wagner or love Harry Potter. People are not groups
Right.
are not a monolith, right? Like there are
Right.
people that are victims of child abuse that have no problem with Michael Jackson or you know whatever. So it's
Or there's gay
everybody's
Republicans.
but I mean, generally speaking, you know, if a group of
Right.
people is saying, hey, at the very least, be aware of X, Y, and Z, we should at least
Yes.
be
Like,
aware of X, Y, and Z when we make decisions
yes.
on what we consume. Because
Yeah. And what
you
we
know, you
teach our children. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you can be a victim of X and still consume. I mean,
I always think about like the prophetic like science fiction films that where they have people looking back at like, oh, look how barbaric culture used to be. It's kind of like that. Like we're there now in a lot
yeah,
of ways.
yeah,
We're looking back, we're saying like I hope hopefully I feel like there's a lot of cultural watersheds that we need to have that we still
yeah,
haven't had against hunting. I feel like that still hasn't reached a tipping point. A lot of game sport stuff is shamed
trophy
like
hunt.
on
Yeah,
Twitter, etc.
yeah,
But I feel like hunting is still very culturally acceptable, hunting for sport and just mounting heads and like that's like still totally cool to do. And I feel like that's something in the future we'll look back and be like, how crazy and barbaric was that we
right.
used to do that.
How unevolved were we? Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. And it's so interesting because with regards to your point about boundaries, yes, obviously, no matter how removed you are from trauma and marginalization, or how or your how close in proximity you are to trauma and marginalization, uh you're going to have to make those decisions for yourself. And for in terms that's what I was going to say. So as far as boundaries are concerned, and to your point about not, you can't let everybody else's pain project onto you and internalize that and then experience no joy, right? So art, specifically art, because capitalism is something none of us can escape from. So I'm reliant on Amazon as an example. I'm reliant on fossil fuels. I'm reliant on the industrialized food industry.
Kill yourself.
All of the horrors of capitalism, we are all
Right.
trapped by, and we're living that right now. But the one thing that is inherently designed to help us survive the hellscape of that, which we cannot escape, is art. So my thing is, when we start throwing everything out, it lacks critical thinking if you don't engage in a nuanced way with the questions. But it's
Right.
it's dangerous because
I feel like it's very immature too. It's like this guy did this horrible thing and made this great art, and I don't know how to grapple with that. Instead, just be like, yes, he was horrible, and yes, he did this great thing. They can coexist. Like I feel like it's mature of us to be able to
I think in
accept.
some cases it can and should, and I think in others it can't and shouldn't. And I think for a lot of people who are more marginalized, it's really hard for them to, because there's a school of art criticism that
Yeah,
that
but
says that the artist's worldview and who they are obviously informs the art. So even though the art is transcendent, it's still imbued with the evil or whatever.
right.
And that's why they
But
can't separate it or
if you
choose
look
not
at
to.
but if you examine all the cases that we referred to, that we referenced, the artist was not known to be evil at the time of the creation of the art. So it'd be very different if like you had Hitler that was like brought over and was like celebrated after already being established as Hitler. And then he started a painting career and we exalted it, right? So I mean, like I feel like in every case we mentioned, we didn't have a cultural awareness about the person being bad until after they were famous already.
Yeah, I think,
I mean, there's so much nuance behind this conversation. Yeah,
yeah,
there's just
it's
there's a lot of nuance.
yeah, I think all we can do is be
And we live in
aware.
a culture that wants to black and white everything.
Yeah, and
In a
which I think is dangerous. And obviously if we're talking about people like Hitler,
probably a bad example at all
yeah, he's
times
all,
to just
you almost can't use that as an example because it's so extreme. But as close as
oh
you
yeah.
can get to that level of evil, whatever that whoever that is, you know, if they gave us, you know, if Beethoven was
Yeah, I mean,
a genocidal maniac and gave us symphony, you know, number 9, whatever the case may be, you know, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? Like,
well,
what do you do?
I think the great thing is that we do all have freedom of choice. Yeah. Even if we aren't free in a moment or aren't free in a way, we are free in a lot of ways, mentally and spiritually, to make a choice of whether or not we want to purchase or partake in said art. So going back to it's an individual choice, it is an individual choice. And I remember being very affected hearing Michael Jackson out in public, because they were still playing him after the Leaving Neverland documentary. And I was like, I mean, come on, like, he's not even going to take a hit on radio after Leaving Neverland comes out. And to me, it was just so like sort of in your face of like, people are still playing him. Cause I feel like in many other instances that would have resulted in like somewhat of a boycott. Right. And I think there was like a tiny one, but there wasn't a huge boycott. Right. There's still such a huge like pro Michael Jackson movement, which is crazy to me, but some people just sort of skate by. But like, so my point in saying that is to say that like sometimes people are continuously confronted with said art or said artist against their will, because like the institutions of radio and television keep propagating and like showing it, you know. And so like it's like, you know, you can only avoid so much of it. Exactly. But I still think that there is some freedom in our society for everyone to make a certain amount of choice. You certainly don't have to put it on your own playlist or purchase it yourself, hopefully. Right. Yeah. I don't know. There's so many ways to look at the conversation. And at the end of the day, this 48-year-old at the time man who drugged and raped a 13-year-old girl created a cinematic masterpiece. So in my opinion, and of course in a lot of other people's opinions, but in my opinion, this really shitty, just typical guy, male, created a feminist masterpiece film. Right? So like what? Yeah, you know, I mean, what's so really crazy, blows my mind, is that he probably is a feminist in his own way, and yet he's also like a rapist of like 13-year-old girls. Well, that's the thing. That's can almost be both. About this, almost. You can. That's the thing that is lacking in these conversations, especially in cancel culture, is we don't have, especially when it comes to politics, we do not have the ability to hold paradox. We do not have the ability to hold the tension of opposites and admit that two things can be true at once. Somebody can be a rapist and somebody can create a really good movie. Okay. Two things, paradox and nuance, I feel like are the two things that are always missing from these conversations. Well, thank God we're here to bring it to the people. It's all because of us. The two white people are going to let you know that we know. Yes, of course. That you want us to know. I wanted to just quickly circle back to the movie and ask you if you are at all and we can close out after this, but yes. I wanted to ask you if you ever went down the color yellow rabbit hole with the movie. Have you heard anything about that? No, take us there. I have no idea. I know red for The Shining, red, you know, stuff like that. So I had never paid close enough attention or seen the movie enough to really clue into this. But in my like research leading up to rewatching the movie, there are a lot of articles on the presence of yellow in the film and what it symbolizes. And as it turns out, there was a short story published in 1892 by a woman named Charlotte Gilman called The Yellow Wallpaper. And it is talk about
another crazy synchronicity. It is about a woman who is suffering postpartum hysteria, and her husband gaslights her, confines her to bed rest, and she slowly goes insane because she's not being heard. And so what she does is she locks herself in that room to make a point. And by the time her husband is actually able to break in, she's deteriorated physically, and he doesn't recognize her, and he collapses in front of her out of fright. And so there's a lot of yellow, and so he's basically, it's like Guy and Rosemary, right? But Rosemary wears a lot of yellow dresses in the film. There's yellow wallpaper.
There's yellow wallpaper. Yeah.
In the bedroom, and she starts hallucinating off of that when she has her first fever dream.
And we see the workers putting up the yellow wallpaper.
They put up yellow wallpaper in the nursery. Apparently, I didn't catch this when I watched it, but apparently when she's in labor, they pull back a white sheet off of her, and underneath is a yellow one. And
isn't there yellow furniture either in the kitchen or something?
I think so. I if we went back and watched, I bet we would see so much that we didn't pick up on.
Right.
One thing I did catch is when she finally does open the closet and pull back the false back to go to the neighbor's house, right as she's walking through it, the camera is behind her, and the camera, for no reason at all, pans up above her head ever so slightly. There's a shelf above her, and there's a yellow sheet, a folded yellow, and it just kind of hovers there and then goes back level.
I love that. I love it.
And
I love all the dreamlike imagery, like how when she goes through that door, like how aware she is that they had taken some paintings down when they first met her before she was aware that they're Satanists.
Right.
There was like, because she saw on the wall where the
color
discoloration
difference,
of where it should be, a painting should be. I just love that, where it's like dreams gaslight you in a way, and this whole film is she's being gaslit, like you said.
You can't trust her own reality, and that whole moment where she passes through the threshold of her apartment into theirs is very much, mythologically speaking, like
Alice in Wonderland.
It's very much to the looking glass, which is also a great example of something in mythology, in Greek mythology, called catabasis, which is the descent into the underworld, or the night sea journey, where you have to go in and under in order to come out the other side of your hero's journey or whatever. But apparently yellow alchemically, and I learned this in my alchemy class, sulfur is yellow, and sulfur represents the masculine. It represents evaporation, transmutation, and it's also, you need sulfur in alchemy. It's the middling element between salt, which represents higher order, and mercury, which represents lower order. So it's this constant, it's a catalyzing element, if you will. So I love that. Really, really interesting that there's this whole other layer.
Love that.
And again, did he do that on purpose?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's
is it in the book, I wonder?
That's up for debate. I don't think a lot of that is in the book. I love alchemy, and you've read The Alchemist, the book The Alchemist?
Yes.
I love that. The parables and in that book and everything. But and I just love the idea of alchemy and metals, and so interesting. And I've never heard that about this film.
Me either.
But now that you mention it, like her yellow dress is so distinctive. And yellow, that's very interesting. I mean, who knows? It could just be projection.
Right.
Because again, we as humans are trained to look for patterns. And there's that whole
thing about storytelling is it's all archetypal. It's all already there in the collective unconscious.
Well, it reminds me of that documentary Shining. The room 237. But that documentary about The Shining, which is so over the top.
It's one of the most extraordinary documentaries, though, because it really does lean into what you're what you're saying.
Yes,
How
it's
much
like
are
if you
we
go all the
projecting?
way, right, all the way down the rabbit hole with that
Because
thought
there's
process.
one of the big things in learning about mythology, not in terms of like tales of myths and fairy tales and folklore, but like the living thing that is mythology, is that myth reveals itself. There's this term called unconcealment. So whether something is a projection or was intended is almost, from a mythological perspective,
Irrelevant.
moot point. Yeah. Like an Alien, did Ridley know he was doing X, Y, and Z, or was it just this perfect storm? Because at the end of the day, that myth, that story needed to reveal itself. Point blank
Sure.
period.
So fascinating. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're having the conversations that need to be had.
I mean, that's why people come to this channel, because we do the deep dives. Okay.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it is interesting though to apply the argument towards things that aren't quote unquote art, to really ask yourself,
Right.
obviously we don't need to watch Rosemary's Baby in order to survive, but I do need to be able to use my iPhone.
I do.
Or a phone, right?
Yeah.
Well, there you go, case in point. But we do need art, maybe not Rosemary's Baby, but we do need art.
Yeah, in general. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. So it's like, what artist is there? Is not an artist under the sun that's not fallible.
No, because every human is fallible.
Right. Exactly. So where do you stop? I mean, it's just, yeah, it's once you begin, if you want to begin down that road, where does it stop? Yeah.
I think all we can hope for ourselves, and anybody, especially those that are in more privileged / less marginalized positions, is to be aware, to listen to what other people are telling you to pay attention to, and think critically about it before, just to think critically, like that's the least we can do about anything.
I'm just thinking about a song by Bjork called Enjoy. And in the song Enjoy from the album Post, I don't know if you're familiar, but
I know the album, but I don't know that song by name.
She's literally saying, like, my goal is to enjoy this experience of being a human, of being alive. I'm here to enjoy. And it's like a mantra in the song. And it's like so joyous the way that she expels it from her gifted vocal cords. She's basically saying, enjoy life. We're here to enjoy. So I feel like we should fight the good fight. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't feel bad for enjoying art for being alive, even art that's by horrible people. Like when I'm like excited and thrilled about how masterful Rosemary's Baby is, I'm not also beating myself up for liking it just because it was made by someone that is capable of being a piece of garbage.
Right.
So I think that's where the disassociation comes in, is like allowing yourself to enjoy this experience of being alive, to enjoy the experience of consuming great art.
Amen.
I want maximum enjoyment. I've been a protester for gay rights. I've done all that stuff too. But I think there's enjoyment in that. I mean, it's all about, at the end of the day, you can take a stand for things and still not come from a bitter place, but come from a place of enjoyment. There's a lot of enjoyment that's missing in modern day life. You and I had the conversation recently about going through the motions, or watching a new film comes out, and normally we'd be like so excited about it. And now it's like almost hard to find joy in it. And for me as well. And I just think it's the times we're living in are so constrictive, and they sort of stamp all the joy out of everything.
Right.
So it's
which
like, how
makes
do
it
we
harder to make these choices
right.
for yourself, because you want to be a good ally. You want to operate from your highest self. But when life is, what it is right now, which is not much of a life, it's really, I find it like you do. I take issue with people who, not with people who point the finger and necessarily make people feel guilty for liking what they like, but for people that don't, that aren't able to hold paradox, especially in this moment when life is so hard, and get, you know, as long as you're not harming somebody, you should be able to get joy however you can fucking get it.
Yeah, and how do we find joy in standing with our brothers and sisters and marginalized people that we want to stand with, and still fight the good fight, but still even find joy in that? I mean, it's like impossible to find joy in anything these days. Across the board, how do we reclaim joy?
That's the question. That is the question.
It's harder, definitely harder these days than when we were growing up. I mean, everything is exacerbated. Everything is in your face 24/7. And I love that feature on the iPhone of like, do not disturb now. I'm starting to learn how to toggle that on and off.
Yeah, I can't.
Because otherwise.
I have to turn my notifications off, or
it's
we're
crazy.
bombarded
nonstop
with trauma at a rate unseen. And it's not that trauma hasn't happened at this level or this rate before, because for our brown and indigenous brothers and sisters, they will tell you that it's always been the case, but we're now experiencing it, but also everyone is now experiencing it live in real time, in the palm of their hand, 24/7, jacked in. You're jacked in.
If you're like an empath to any degree,
I can't imagine.
That's like,
I cannot imagine.
Very destructive. Yes. Yeah. So it's like, we now have to like take the time to develop a skill set and a set of tools.
Yes.
To like deal with that.
Yeah. I mean,
because we all have endless time to do that, right?
You named it. We have to negotiate how we get our joy, which is, maybe that always should have been the case, but regardless, like Sindel has a lot of thoughts.
Hi, Sindel. I hear you.
We have to negotiate how we get our joy, which I think is a very interesting thing.
There's so much contention that's out there. Everything is like a fight in like a negative sense, and I just think we need to like turn that around and like reclaim it.
People are tired, and I think everybody, I would like to think everybody is doing their best. So you know, we take.
But I feel like marginalized people and people who are, I mean, even you and I are, with our privilege, are more, we're not, you know, the 1%ers. We're all sort of being held down by the system, and we're all being.
So if I want to listen to Billie Jean and read Harry Potter, I may have to do that, you know, and
I think if you really quantify,
advertise it, I don't need to make my case in front of a person that does not agree with me. I just need to shut up and mind my white business and do my best. And
I don't know how many times you can say, but it's individual. Like, that's really what it comes down to for me. That's my takeaway from this, again, is that it's individual, but also, not to have shame in that. And everyone's going to justify everything in their own way. Ultimately, you're really not lining the pockets of J.K. Rowling again. It's more about the performative aspect, I think, of like how you celebrate it within society, and not your personal relationship to it, because your personal relationship to it ultimately isn't going to be policed in comparison to like you wearing the t-shirt in public, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
There's so many different levels to this.
Having tact. Just have some tact.
Yes, tact. Think critically. That's what's missing too.
Listen, have some goddamn tact. Nuance. Hold some paradox and
nuance.
You know,
paradox, nuance, and tact. We got to add tact.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yes, tact is what's missing.
It is a lot
across
of tact
the board. Yes.
Well, we're bringing tact back, baby. Okay.
Use your better judgment.
Yeah, we've said everything we could possibly say about Rosemary's Baby.
That was a good art v artist discussion, I think.
I think so.
We've been trying to have this discussion for a really long time. I think we finally had it.
We finally had it. And you raised points that I hadn't considered, and
vice versa.
I enjoyed this. This was good medicine for me, and
it was good. And by no means, I mean, we've, for all intents and purposes, we've only scratched the surface in some ways.
right.
But close us out.
And well, for all of our adoring fans, you know, if you loved Rosemary's Baby, stay tuned for Pinocchio.
Great segue.
Because we have to circle back to our Disney Classics movie hour. I hope you guys enjoyed our Rosemary's Baby movie hour. I hope we gave you something to think about. And I hope if you have something to say about this that you would be willing to comment and share, I will make sure we link everything we referenced in the description. And if you dig these, we got a whole lot of them. So we thank you for watching. Chad, I love you, and we will see you guys on the other side.
Love you too. Hope I didn't talk over you too much.
Ditto.
See you on the flip side.